Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm well, my friend, and good to see you, Nathan. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm fine. It's good to see you, and I know you've been on a trip recently. You've been to Israel for the Christian Media Summit, and I think after we've had a discussion about that, but I think we need to focus this dialogue on that. So let's have a dialogue.
Let's have a dialogue, my friend.
So as I said, Mark, you've been to Israel, just recently got back, and you went over there for the Christian Media Summits in Israel. Well, it was based in Jerusalem and all over. Can you just tell us a bit about it and what it was for? And then we can go on to some of the locations you visited.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. It was a real privilege to go. So it's the 7th Christian Media Summit. The last one, I believe, was 2 years ago. It's had a disruption. The disruption was the attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023 by Hamas. So with the 2 years of the war. It's sponsored by the Govt Press Office of Israel. And my dear friend John Haller was on the trip and wonderfully well behaved, which is great. So as a shout out to John, it was great to spend a week with him. It was good fun, and everyone else. So there was 34 countries, I believe, were represented. And I then applied to go, and I then got accepted, which is fantastic, a real privilege. They then go through, you know, if you say I'm on Facebook, I'm trying to do this, trying to do that, speak up, give examples in regard to advocating for Israel. And then they will look at that. And then, yes, please come in. We've booked you in, which is amazing. So there were 3 coach loads of people on this trip. It was quite considerable. And as you can imagine, when you've got 3 coach loads, there's a lot of organization to do. It's a lot of work. So I was out there 5-6 days. So Nathan, let's take it in whatever direction you want. There is a lot to say, and I just want to say this: since being back a few days ago, it's been a relentless, do a radio show, go on News X, make some comments, record another show with other friends, and then recording our own show. So it's a real privilege to do this, and I'm taking the role, understandably, very serious.
I think it's very important at this time that Israel continues to network and continues to kind of confront the bias within the media. And I know in our conversation, you aptly said that Israel is fighting an 8-front war, and the 8th one is the media. And most people acknowledge that, and Israel is way behind on the propaganda war, because there's a lot of propaganda out there. And just before we look at your trip, we know closer to home the BBC in relation to their bias.
Yeah.
And I know that you was on a news station today talking about that. Do you just want to just cover that briefly in a few minutes, and then we can go on to the trip? But I think that's crucial just for people to understand the bias of the BBC, but also to understand why it's important for these events, what you've just been to.
No, thank you. Well, the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, has resigned. The head of news, the surname of that lady is Turnus, has resigned. Going back to the lady who was heading up their news, in charge of that, said there's no bias within the BBC, and it is a well-respected body of journalism, or words to that effect. You and I would sit back like other dear friends of ours and go, we don't agree with you. Now, wonderful organizations like Camera have been going on about this for many, many years. The journalist Jonathan Sacerdoti has, Douglas Murray, of course, wonderfully has. We've had Newswatch. Even though you've got UN Watch, but that organization will be looking at other, how the media represents Israel at the UN. So this was we've got to remember a few things. So remember, the BBC put out a documentary of a child in Gaza. We then discovered that that child is then the son of a Hamas leader. If we use the term, whether we can call it governance, I don't think so, is another word, even though they were then elected in Gaza in 2007 after the Israelis withdrew in 2005. And the son, this young boy is a son of a Hamas representative. So that was the first scandal. Wonderful David Collier. There's a big shout out to him as a wonderful research journalist. Done this for many, many years. And then also another shout out, and this is very important because people have been doing this for a long time, but also trying to help people get their work out. So the Conservative Woman, that also has a fantastic article in the last couple of days by David Keeley in regard to the BBC, and also David Collier explaining the background to this. So let's remember where the BBC would not prescribe, say, a prescribed terrorist organization, instead of saying they are a terrorist organization, even though they are called a terrorist organization according to according to the government, according to the Foreign Office. So all of this is how things are being portrayed, but also the BBC have a station called BBC Arabic, and there have been huge concerns about that and their output there. And also in regard to who they then invite onto the program, onto the channel of BBC Arabic, and particular guests that seem to get a regular outing on the channel, and make various comments that are profoundly anti-Semitic and seem to get away with it, linking the Jews with Hitler, and historically all of this, and the anti-Semitic tropes. So that is out there. And then we remember Glastonbury, remember Bob Villan going death, leading a chant of death to the IDF. Which is just absolutely abhorrent. There were a big crew of BBC there because they were filming it, and I understand that Tim Davie was there. If I were there, I would be launching for the wire to pull the plug out of the power socket as soon as possible. They didn't do that. They didn't put a blank screen up going, sorry, we're being interrupted by aliens or whatever, and we will come back to this later, because what Bob Villan has done, was saying, was just so appalling. So there is all of this, Nathan, in the mix, and then they have resigned because they got caught in how they then edited a piece about a subject that is also very dear to my heart over the last 4 years, which is Donald Trump's speech on January the 6th, 2021, after the presidential election. And it was the day where the votes would be ratified. On that particular day, he was outside making a speech. And I'd just like to say this, at 1:06, the police outside then started firing rubber bullets, gas grenades, etc., into the Patriot crowds. There were children in those crowds. Ted Cruz stood up, is the man that stood up at 1:06 with other congressmen, senators, with other senators, asking Vice President Pence at that time, what do you do in this procedure in regard to the Electoral College? They have an Electoral College Each state has a number of votes because some states are far bigger than others. And what you would then have had is that if you didn't have the electoral college, you would have had New York, Washington and Los Angeles deciding who was going to be president infinitum. And you can see how that would have gone politically. So Trump they then edited his speech, and they joined after a few minutes, missing a gap of 54 minutes of what he said at the end of his speech, joined those together, and they played that before the presidential election last November in 2024. This is about the patriots went there on the day to take their constitutional rights, and people may never to protest about that, which they are entitled to do. And I'll just finally say this, and this is where it's the parallel of how the press portrays and how it twists the news, and how it twists the news about a very, very important subject, because 1,600 people had been arrested, became Jan 6 prisoners. And dear friend of mine, David Summerall of StopHate.com, who's made 4 documentaries about this, has been the leading advocate in America, if not the world, on this subject. So by manipulating the media, you then put 1,600 people's lives, totally turn them upside down, put them in danger when the FBI turn up with guns that have red dots on the end, and they're going all over people's houses. They are then going over, when people come out of their houses, it's also going over people's families. Now, why do I know this? It's because I've met some of these people. And just to clarify this, on the day has taken so many months. And also just bear in mind, all the wonderful people that are listening, bear in mind the media manipulation in regard to what's happened with Gaza and Israel, and this particular situation, because it's manipulation. Because out of this, you then had Liz Cheney, you had Adam Shifty Schiff and et al. Then holding court, and in the end, President Trump, they were taking him to court every other week. And this is how it was manipulated. And on that day, Benjamin Phillips, Kevin Greason, Roseanne Boyland, and dear Ashley Babbitt were killed, died, along with Officer Signick. To start off with Officer Signick. Officer Signick was taken to Patriot Lines. He was having a heart problem. He was taken to Patriot Lines by the Patriots were there, and one of them was medically trained. He then offered his medical experience. The police lines, I understand, said no, he'll be fine. He's with us. And sadly, he died the next day. He died because of a heart problem, not because he was bashed over the head with a fire extinguisher, which the press accused the Patriots of doing. Kevin Greason, Benjamin Phillips, sadly died because of smoke bombs, other rubber bullets being fired into the crowd, and the shock of that. Roseanne Boyland was beaten severely and died of those injuries by Myla Morrison, a policewoman that was then given prime seats at the Super Bowl and lauded as a hero. And I had the privilege to meet Philip Anderson, who tried to save her life. We also then, sadly, Ashley Babbitt was then shot to death by Michael Byrd inside the congressional building. So many people listening to us now, and I pray that it will be many, may never have heard that before. So let's flip. If people bear that in mind in regard to how things are portrayed in Israel, and we think of how things are portrayed with in Judah and Samaria. Others on the other side of the equation call it the West Bank. We will call it Judah and Samaria, which is their proper names. Then you get into this whole thing where were Israeli Jews who were there. They're called settlers, and as people greater than me call, no, they're resettlers, as Israel is 77, 78 years young, 3,500 years old, which says about how long the Jewish people have been in the land. And it's a lesson in how about media manipulation. You remember the comments on, the IDF shot bits off a church, and things like this. And when it's everyone piles in, so things accidentally happen. It's war. We also have to remember the Hamas figures, which they were often quoted on the BBC. These are the amount of people dying when they're regularly throwing that, and that figure of 65,000. What they're not telling you is how many members of those are actually Hamas terrorists. And then it's always coming from, the health ministry, the Gazan health ministry. I'd just like to say this, that any death on any side is deeply regrettable. But if you are a terrorist organization that's built a tunnel system, the equivalent of the London Underground and more, and you are then fighting urban warfare that the IDF, Israeli army, has had to do in unbelievably incredible circumstances. And when you've got tunnels that are so wide that you can drive trucks through from the Philadelphia corridor on the Egyptian side, when you are dealing with drones coming over with armaments, particularly on the Egyptian side and on the Syrian border and elsewhere, there is a heck of a lot to deal with. But drilling down and finding the truth is the most important thing. And that's ending my sort of number of minutes here, Nathan. That was the reason for going, my friend.
No, thank you. I think that gives people an understanding, but also sets it in context of what's going on in the West as well. Now, I know when you went over there, you visited Kibbutz near Oz, and you also went to the Nova Festival site. What was that like, and how did it feel to be in a place? You've already mentioned October the 7th, and for most people who have listened to anything about that, they'll know about, or they'll have some understanding of the Nova Festival, and they'll have some understanding of some of the kibbutz, or they'll know that some of the kibbutz on the Gaza border where atrocities happened. So can you just expound about what you was told, what you saw, and how it was visiting those two sites?
No, thank you, Nathan. And the thing is, when you are visiting places like this, there are those moments. I was thinking, I don't really want to get my camera out, because I feel as though it's like voyeurism, right? But we do have to take pictures, and we do have to take a film, because it's really important, because these things have to be shown and they have to be talked about. It was harrowing in many ways to go, because you walk into that particular kibbutz. If I have my figures right, it's been reported that there were 400 residents of that kibbutz, and 200 of them were murdered or taken as hostages in that particular place. So half of them survived, the other half have not. Then when you are seeing the communal area of where people would go to dinner within the kibbutz, you've got bullets in the glass. There are bullets in the walls. And the other thing we have to bear in mind is that you're standing there looking through a fence, looking through, they call that area the Gaza envelope. Remember, the Israelis withdrew in 2005. When they withdrew, a number of Jewish American businessmen that were, they've been as well, they piled money into that, because to leave business opportunities. Gaza at that point was shipping, many flowers and other goods around the world. So I think the name that people will remember, and it is so tragic, and it's important that we do remember, to stand outside the Bibas family house was a bit of a moment, really. I mean, there are pictures up of the people who have died. There were red and black, like tape over lockers to illustrate who had survived, who was sadly no longer with us. But to stand outside the Bibas family home and to think of with the picture, the awful picture of the mother Sherry, who held Ariel and Kiefer in her arms, and Ariel then was 4. The younger child, Kiefer, was 9 months, and he was still on the bottle. And Ariel was a huge Batman fan, is being talked about, press, reported on. And a dear young man has just run in the New York Marathon, dressed up as Batman, but the insignia in orange or red, as they, to indicate their red hair, but as a tribute to them and to keep that family in people's memory. They were all taken hostage, and the father, Yarden, was later released, and the tragedy unfolded because his wife and the 2 children were murdered. And you remember, and the Israelis have just been through this again, which is part of the, I try not to do air quotes too cynically, but part of the ceasefire, part of this peace plan, was that all the 20 hostages that were alive that have been outstanding would then be returned. That has happened, but also the bodies of IDF soldiers that have fallen, and also the hostages that have fallen, that were kidnapped and taken, that those bodies will be returned. And in Sherry's case, there was that awful situation when everyone thought they were getting her body back, and Hamas put another body in the bag. And the reason why I'm saying that is because also the psychological games and the trauma that the Israeli citizens have had to put up with is off the charts. And when you are then you're just bearing that in mind. But the other thing, Nathan, that's really important to say is, and it's been well reported on, is that in the kibbutzim, in that area, the Palestinians from Gaza would then come over and work in the kibbutzim side by side with the Israelis for a long period of time. But they were then gathering intel of who was living where. Did they have a dog? Where were they armed? How many? What was the distance between the fence and houses and all this? I mean, you have a military background. You will understand what, if you were doing an operation, you would want to know as much intel as possible. And that is what went on. And the other thing to remember, and again, it's been reported on, because you and I, and like many others, have been watching the news on this subject for a long time. It was my second visit to Israel this year. I had the privilege to go with you in May and a few other friends of ours. So to then have the opportunity to visit the particular places that we went to is profoundly important. To then meet people that were fighting and defending others within the kibbutzim was very particular. But just one gentleman was very powerful. And I'll never forget a conversation. I hope to be in touch with him. I'll never forget a conversation when he said to me, where are you from? I said, from the UK. And he goes, the UK? And I said, yes, we're not all nutters and stupid. And many of us actually stand with you. Because it's how it's represented. And Israel feels isolated by the world. We see the propaganda machine, Nathan, that the Qatar has invested in over the last 30 years. Other people greater than me have commented on this. You and I will be doing, God willing, we'll get some guests on to discuss this. So bearing in mind, just a reminder of the links between people that were living in Gaza. We had the Hamas terrorists coming over, but you also then have people that would call themselves citizens then of Gaza, if I can use the term, that would not be sort of dressed in green army uniforms and having a bandana of Hamas around their head, but they came over. And there was a discussion that's been said that they actually committed in places worse atrocities than the actual Hamas terrorists did. So they were killing. We remember the awful things that they did, where we won't go into certain details. We will, when a baby is thrown into an oven, when children are murdered in front of their parents, or their partners are murdered in front of them, people are tied up back to back. I know that you've read quite a bit about that. I have seen certain footage that in many ways I wish I could get out of my mind, but we can't. This is what we're dealing with when people's body parts are being removed in ways that are just indescribable. And it is
just on that, Mark, I read one account, in fact I've read a few, where one gentleman, his job was to go and remove the dead bodies, let's say, and a lot of his volunteers, they're now having trauma counselling because of the atrocities they saw.
Yeah.
And one of them went to speak to a friend's father who was a Holocaust survivor, and when he told him the stuff he'd seen, the gentleman actually said, that is far worse than what we endured in some respect. Now, they're different accounts, you see. But what he said by that was quite profound, because he went through Mengeler's experiments. So you've got someone who went through Mengeler's experiments saying to this gentleman, what he has witnessed in some respect is far worse than what happened then. And you also mentioned something about recording. I know when Kelly and I recently went to the to Krakow and Auschwitz, we didn't want to record anything. We didn't want to do anything like that because of where we were. But you feel like that. But if you remember when the accounts of the Holocaust, not that we was there, but the US president at the time said it needs to be recorded so people don't forget and deny it. And so we can learn from this. And so they recorded much of what went on. And so it's critical that people understand actually what transpired. Yes, I was saying, just like when you're in a situation like that, when you was at the Nova Festival site and also at the Kibbutz Rizon, when I was at Auschwitz, you don't want to record anything due to what had gone on there. And I know when I was walking around Auschwitz, there was people with their cameras, they was filming everything, but Kelly and I was just felt out of respect. We shouldn't. However, it is crucial that we record those events in relation so people can find the truth, because people deny what went on. Revisionist history goes on. And I believe it was the president of the USA who said, we need to record and document these events because a day will come when people will deny them. And I don't know how people can deny the extent of the Holocaust when there is footage, overwhelming footage, primary accounts of what happened. But likewise, there is also of October the 7th. And the atrocities what went on, and rightly so. There's video footage to try and refute people saying it didn't happen, because people say it didn't happen. And the atrocities what went on are evil, absolute evil. And this is showing us the anti-Semitism, which is rising. And maybe later on we can discuss why that's rising. But just carry on about why you was there and how you found it, and why it's crucial that people people remember and actually don't forget.
Absolutely. And again, apologies to viewers on that interruption, but we can move on. We then visited the Nova Festival site. We've got to remember the on that road that's adjacent there. People were machine gun killed in their cars everywhere, to the left, to the right. And then they flew in by little gliders. They went to the Nova Festival. They knew what was going on, and then killed many young people there. On that day, let's just remind ourselves, there was just over 1,200 people killed. It was the worst attack in a day since the Holocaust. And the memorial at the Nova Festival is very moving, because there are pictures of all these young Israeli men, young women there. And we were given a talk by one of the survivors, and you're right, it's taken its toll. The bravery on that day, where, and also within the kibbutz, where, you know, the evil that was done, where they're throwing a grenade into rooms, into a safe room, and people, you know, men then launching their bodies onto the grenade to save their families. And just quickly go back to the kibbutzim, is the fact that there's safe rooms for the rockets that were coming over, that have been coming over regularly from Gaza. So as Hamas turned Gaza into a rocket launch pad, that has to be said. And how would you feel of actually living in that kind of environment? So Nova Festival, unbelievably moving as well. But and there's, you know, again, you are preparing yourself emotionally. And I think, Nathan, as you said, where, you know, your recent visit to Auschwitz, I was there in 1986, harrowing, something that's never left me. And just to confirm that Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, while I was out there, confirmed that they have traced, 5 million of the Jews that were murdered and in the gas chambers, etc. So, and I'm not saying that lightly at all, because I think for many people it's so hard to think, because we live in this world where we don't want to discuss evil, we don't want to discuss that there is a good and there is an evil. That is hard for some people to get their head around, but evil was definitely, without doubt, playing out on that day. It took a few days for the IDF and others to flush out the terrorists and push them back, or kill them and get them out to the other side of the fence. The other thing I would like to just quickly mention, you know, this was done under the premiership of Ariel Sharon, and he was then the head of the Likud party, which was this whole thing. Well, if we withdraw from there, we are going to get peace. The Israelis, after the 6-day war in 1967, then found themselves in charge of Gaza. The Egyptians didn't want to take that back. And of course, sadly, you've had Intifada 1, 2, and a load of other terrorist activity that's gone on in there. So Ariel Sharon then took the decision, the government took the decision then that they would withdraw. And also, if you read around the subject, it was then mooted that Ariel Sharon was then looking at the fact that that maybe they would be surrendering, handing back parts of Judah and Samaria. They will be handing what the other side calls the West Bank. Ariel Sharon then, in January 2006, went into a coma and he went into a vegetative state, which he was in until he died, until 2014. I'd just like to put that out there, because one of so moving on as well then, Nathan, the other trip up north, so we've been down south. There were many in the evenings. There were meetings, people addressing us from government officials, and also during one day, then meeting, having an address by the deputy foreign minister, and also meeting other people on the ground, people that advocate for Israel. Well, there's people like the Israel Guys show and others, and Rosenberg, based there with the regular show that comes out of there, talking about what's happening in Israel. I then had the privilege to meet Doron Kida, who recently was interviewed by Liam Tufts. I will find that and put that interview in the chat, because Doron was very frank about what he faced and what he saw. So that was a real privilege to meet him. But one day, on one of the days, we then traveled up north. So we went to the furthest town we could in Israel, up north, right on the Lebanon border. We have to remind ourselves that there were 80,000 Israeli citizens that were evacuated from that area because Hezbollah would be regularly firing rockets in, as they have done for many years. The Israeli Defense Force government have been very concerned about Hezbollah and what it has access to. Now, miraculously, when Sinwar then launched this Hamas attack, Hezbollah didn't really jump in with massive barrages of rockets at the same time. I personally, and I pray I've got those facts right, because I do believe it was the hand of God in that situation. Because the whole thing, it comes down to what Iran was creating with the circle of fire, which is Hamas, which is Hezbollah, which of course is rockets from Iran. Then you have the Houthis as well, and Hezbollah, by firing those rockets, there's a number of houses up north that have been damaged. A load of rebuilding of that has been going on. People moving back into the northern town. And just to remind people that for a number of years, because, say, on the Syrian side, we'll come to that, there would be marksmen and Syrian members of the army there that would be firing and picking off Israeli farmers as they were going out there, as they were conducting their work and their living. But on the Lebanon border, we're reminded of the pager attack, that the idea that Israel did, and these pages then were given that the Hezbollah terrorists had, and then suddenly they were all going off, taking them out as they were killing or injuring them, and then we found out who was the terrorist. They wouldn't use mobile phones for reasons of tracking, GPS, finding out where they are. And as we know, that Mossad, the IDF, Shin Bet, what they can do, I think no other people can really do. So, and that also, we've got to remember that there's been the 12-day war where they had complete air superiority over Iran, and then the Americans came in with those huge stealth fighters and bombed nuclear facilities in Iran. And on that point, you had Israelis, Mossad defense inside Iran, launching drone attacks from inside, many miles inside Iran. And of course, we've got to remember that they have taken out a number of the Revolutionary Guard and generals and leaders. So, without it sounding a mouthful, we look at what they've done within Lebanon against Hezbollah and taking out so many of those forces there. And also, as we go to the Syrian border, Nathan, it's to stand there as well, because it does bring it home with what they've been facing. I had the privilege on our trip in May to sit down with someone who was involved with the Lebanon War in 1982. That is, to be in a war situation mainly is well beyond my experience. Not seeing bullet holes elsewhere is something I have seen, and people dead in the street. So when you're sitting down with people and you know that so many people as Israeli citizens have served in the IDF and then in the reserves, because of the war, people have served 700 days, maybe full, part-time. Everyone is every man and woman to the pumps. And what is a real credit to the young people that have been fighting like lions over the last 2 years is that people that are older than them in their generations have acknowledged their bravery and just been pleasantly pleased and celebrating how hard they have fought. Because this whole thing of that we view young people as totally woke, they don't want to get involved in any of that. Remember that they had 150%, I think, call up after the awful things of October the 7th, 2023. People were flying in all over the place from around the world. So I'll just quickly finish with the Syrian border to stand there in 1970. In 1973, there'd been a huge tank battle historically. That is now taught at West Point, and that was at the beginning to be a close shave with the Syrians, and there were many. I think I've read, especially with people like Lance Lambert, many miracles that happened on that day. They were defeated and clearly and pushed back. Golda Meir was the prime minister at that time. We, as Britain, didn't exactly come out with flying colours, as I believe within the Ted Heath government, going, we don't really want to give spare parts to the Israelis in regard to tanks, etc. So maybe that's the reason why we went into the European Union, Nathan, and we were captured, which is a subject for another day. So to stand there and to remind ourselves of what then the fact that the Syrian Assad fell, Gilani, this ISIS Al Qaeda terrorist till recently with a bounty on his head of $10 million, who's just found himself in the White House greeting President Trump. President Trump described, I like him, I get on very well with him, he's in a tough neighborhood. I've got some huge issues with that, Nathan, I have to say.
Yes.
Just quick, and also I want to say this, that when we were there on the Syrian border, in that area, Druze community, there's also a Druze community in Syria. There was an awful event over a year ago where a Hezbollah rocket went into a football field equivalent, where young children were playing football, etc., and 12 children were killed from this rocket. In the evening there, I need to come back to that, but we then had an internet connection with someone in Sweden, which is 45 miles from the Syrian border. of the Druze community, and the Syrian government. Then all these factions. I mean, it's not. You can confirm that Jelani is not in charge of, I think Al Shira, or how he pronounces his, what he calls himself, or a terrorist in a suit. Um, that there was attack on Christians, genocide of Christians there, attack on the Druze. We've seen some of the footage. Some of the things they've done are beyond disgusting, and murdering that community. And as I said, Israel went in and bombed certain parts of that area, including attack on Damascus, because of the Druze community within Israel, and also that community lobbying for that. So the Israeli government did that. The Syrian leader is, you could say, what is he in charge of? 50% of his country. So it is it's a situation that is ebbing and flowing. And of course, then in that evening, we then went into a little theatre, and a mother of one of the children who sadly was murdered, her daughter, she came to speak. Her husband was in the room at the same time. Words, what can I say? Awful tragedy. And when Israel has been accused of committing genocide in Gaza, which it has not, let's remind of the events that have been happening in Nigeria, that have been happening in the Sudan, and people killed for their faith there. So let's just put that in context, but also with a rocket coming over from Hezbollah, like with the rockets from Syria, with the Hamas attack. It's about killing Jews. It's about wiping Jews off the face of the earth. That is what this is all about. I think in April 2024 there was that awful rocket attack from Iran when they launched so many rockets. So, Nathan, I do apologise in the fact that
No.
I haven't stopped, and I hope I've given people an idea of what's gone on. And quickly just say this about Gaza: if they hadn't have withdrawn from Gaza in 2005, then October the 7th, 2023 would not have happened. Let's just say that. It's very uncomfortable, maybe for some people to accept that. But that was said with private conversations I'd had. But the other thing is also from the front in various meetings with other people, people were calling out quite rightly Tucker Carlson, as we call him, Candace Owen, the recent interview that Tucker Carlson did with Nick Fuentes, and calling them out for doing that, and the anti-Israel and at times the obviously anti-Israel, anti-Semitic comments that they were coming out with. So people were calling that out. There is also, I need to say this because it'd be dishonest if I didn't. Praise God, the 20 hostages who were alive, the rest of them have been released. We need all the bodies back. But this has been negotiated by Witkoff, by Kushner. They do have links with Qatar, business-wise. That is something that has to be borne in mind, in my own humble opinion. Why wasn't Secretary Rubio negotiating this? And as a reminder, just to remind people that the leaders of Hamas have were living high on the hog in Qatar. Very wealthy men. Remember that the money that's been given by the EU, America, by the UK as part of the EU, and others, many countries around the world, these people have become very rich on it, Nathan. Yes. And the other thing to say, as a dear friend of mine, Matthew Anthony Harper, Dr. Matthew Anthony Harper, who regularly tries to get into the White House press pack, who represents and speaks up on Israel's behalf, who raised the concern about the funding of UNRWA in 2017 in the first Trump presidency, and who is raising that again. And UNRWA, the United Nations relief agency, that seems to have a difficulty in keeping its wires from its computers and other rooms out of Hamas tunnels, as we've all found that when Israel has been accused of bombing hospitals. No, the fact that Hamas hides behind them. I will stop there, Nathan, and I'm saying those things to remind people of what has been going on, what the IDF has been dealing with. And just quickly, you and I remember soon after the October the 7th, when Israel, and this again is another industry sort of illustration of propaganda, of how they were then accused of bombing a hospital. They didn't. It was a misfire from a Hamas rocket that went into a car park. And what was fascinating was how quick the Gaza Health Ministry then reported, 300 people dead, etc. No, and that it was a Hamas rocket. And then can we have the apology far later for that and that accusation? Nathan, we've got about 4 minutes. I'll leave it to you.
But thank you, Matt. I think it's very crucial that people understand what you did while you was over there, but also what you've just given your summary of that is crucial. And I just want to end on one key point, and that is the rising anti-Semitism and the rising, really, hatred of truth and the things of God is something people watching really need to look at, especially within the prophetic time clock, which is ticking. And people often, due to their disconnect and their biblical illiteracy, fail to see the times we're living in. One, because as we've taught many times, that Christians don't understand their identity, so they can't see when it's talking about the church within Scripture. So in relation to anti-Semitism, we're seeing it in our nation, we're seeing it in the West. We saw it when the Maccabee football team couldn't have supporters in Birmingham because there was frightened in the UK that they couldn't keep the supporters safe due to the Islamists. We're seeing this constantly in our nation. We're seeing it constantly in the West. And what people need to understand about this is this. This is Bible prophecy. Revelation 12 talks clearly about that anti-Semitism will rise, and people won't see it because it's talking in prophetic language, but we'll talk about this another time. And also in Matthew 24 talks about this in the Olivet Discourse. People need to understand, if Jewish people are listening to this, they need to really contemplate making Aliyah, because actually Israel is going to be the only safe place for a short time. And for Christians watching this, they need to really understand that persecution is coming. Christian nationalism won't save you. Politicians won't save you. In the UK, Tommy Robinson won't save you. Neither will Farage. The only thing which is going to save people in these days is giving their lives to Jesus and accept him as your Lord and Savior and surrendering your life to God. Because we are living in prophetic times. And everything you've just been talking about really identifies that. Because what happened on October the 7th was an unleashing of the Antichrist spirit. And we see that within Islam. The Antichrist spirit, according to Scripture, is those who deny the Son, those who come against the things of God. And so we see that within Islam. They declare every day that there is only one God and he has no son. Well, actually, there is only one God, yes, but he has a son. His name is Jesus, Yeshua, and he died for our sin so that we don't have to. We don't have to go to the lake of fire. And so we know that in the days coming, there's going to be an Antichrist who comes. And just finally, on the other point you mentioned, which is trauma, the trauma which is being experienced in Israel is unprecedented in any other nation. They've had this for centuries. but it's really intensified back in the land. And one thing that will do is, when the Antichrist comes and he seeks to bring a peace, because of the extent of the trauma, they will embrace him. And that's for many evangelicals don't like to talk about, that Jewish people initially will accept the Antichrist. Jesus himself said, I come in the name of the Father, but the one who comes in his own name, you will accept.
Yeah.
And they will, because the Antichrist will rule and reign from Israel, from Jerusalem.
Nathan, that is a really good point. Sorry to stop on, because I'm about to run out of time, but I just want to thank you for everyone listening. Please, when you see this, please share, please get in touch with us, please write comments, so we can grow this. But thank you, my friend. I'm just going to play us out.
Thank you.
Take care.